welcome to the Dr. DC podcast. My name is Dr. DC, and sitting next to me is absolutely no one. I'm all by myself, all by my lonesome. Richard is busy plotting the next way he's going to insinuate himself into some sort of position of power in our community. And so I am recording this one solo dolo this week. Each week, we answer your questions about the weird and wonderful world of DC Comics while fielding questions from listeners like you. It's definitely off when it's just me. Don't tell Richard that I fucked up the intro. I give him enough grief about that. Nobody tell him. I know you're all loyal, and so no one will snitch. And I'm going to use words like that, like you're loyal. And I know that I'm going to give orders today because today I'm going to be Dr. Dumb and we're going to talk about a Legion of Subs. That's right. We're talking about the Legion of Substitute Heroes this week. If you thought the Legion of Superheroes was weird and silly, this is the team of people that didn't make that team. The rejects, as it were, from the Legion of Superheroes. So this is a team that I love. Like, one of the first issues of any comic I ever read was an issue of Superboy and the Legion of Superheroes that belonged to my dad. And in that issue, it had a backup that featured the Legion of Substitute Heroes. And so right from the get-go, I knew that they existed. I think it probably took a while for me to really process that they were the rejects, but the Legion of Substitute Heroes is absolutely like a team that I've been aware of for a long time and that I think are great and sort of fun and silly in the way that there are corners of DC that are extremely fun and silly. So we got a few questions about this, so let's jump right in, shall we? First question, we're going to Facebook, going to the face and the book, going to the Facebook. And the first question is from Chad Bokelman, Bokel, who asks, so didn't they essentially commit genocide in their first appearance? So, the Legion of Substitute Heroes first appears in, I think it's Adventure Comics 306. And in that story, the founding members of the Legion of Substitute Heroes, so that's Polar Boy, Night Girl, Chlorophyll Kid, Fire Lad, and Stone Boy. And actually, I should back up here. So for those that have missed it or haven't listened to the episodes that we did on the Legion of Superheroes, the proper Legion, this all takes place in like the far future. So in like for a while it was the 30th century. Now it's the 31st century. But basically 1,000 years in the future. That's when this takes place. And the Legion of Superheroes is made up of largely beings whose inherent powers from their planet are useful in a team context to help defend Earth, defend the galaxy, all defend the United Planets as a political organization, etc., etc. Not every single member totally fits that bill, but that's more or less the idea. And the idea with the Legion of Superheroes too was that they were youth. They were meant to be like not adults, at least initially. You know, that was the initial idea of them. The Legion of Substitute Heroes is made up, like I said, these 5 founding members. So Polar Boy, Night Girl, Chlorophyll Kid, Fire Lad, and Stone Boy are all rejected from Legion of Superheroes tryouts. They go, we see a couple of them demonstrate their powers, and their powers, something goes wrong, or they're wacky, or they don't work. For a large portion of the team that ends up being the Legion of Substitute Heroes, it's usually that they can't control their power entirely. It's certainly true for Polar Boy. It's a little bit true for Fire Lad. It's true for a later addition to the team, Infectious Lass, who controls like bacteria and disease and stuff like that. Generally, they're rejected because they can't control their power. In some cases, they're rejected because their power is, quote, useless, like Stone Boy or Color Kid or something like that. We'll get into some of these further as we go. But in that first appearance, we meet these 5 who are all dejected after being rejected by the Legion. And they decide to band together and make a secret hideout in a mountain. And they're going to make a like trouble alert kind of thing. And they're going to be their own team. And they're going to prove themselves to the Legion. And what happens is they keep showing up to places like right after the Legion gets there. Like they're supposed to go to save the day, and the Legion's already there mopping up, essentially. And at one point, they find these like weird the Legion is busy fighting like robots or something, and they find these weird seeds. And Chlorophyll Kid uses his power, which is to accelerate the growth of plant life. And we learned that these seeds actually like birth little like ent guys, like little like plant people or whatever. But there's thousands of them. And so immediately right away, Fire Lad breathes fire all over these things, roasts all the seeds, destroys them. And the Legion of Subs says the robots must be like a distraction so that these seeds can invade Earth. The plant people can invade Earth. And so they go to the planet of the plant people. And weirdly enough, the weird part is that they're right. It is like a planned invasion. And they find this like warehouse full of seeds that are going to get launched onto rockets and sent to Earth or whatever to invade Earth. Now, on the planet, Chlorophyll Kid actually uses his power to turn all of the seeds into plant people. So the planet is then overrun with its own people. That's kind of how they save the day there. But on Earth, when they find those seeds, they do have Fire Lad just like straight up destroy them all. And that's after they know what they are. So the argument can be made. I mean, I guess this is a bad distinction to make. I would say it's mass murder. They did not go to the planet to wipe them out, but they do commit essentially, I would argue, mass murder. I'm sure someone in the comments is going to come at me about how they're seeds and make some sort of when does plant person life begin kind of comment. But I think you can reasonably say that it's, at the very least, it's an aggressive act on the part of the Legion of Subs to just torch all of these seeds. Because it also, when you read the story, it feels a little bit like a guess. They go like, well, a plant person's here. Obviously, this is an invasion if there's all these seeds. Like, there's no estimation that it's an accident or that they're misinterpreting it. It seems coincidental that they're right and not a function of them doing any sort of good, like, investigative work. So, yeah, I think you can make the argument that in their first appearance, the Legion of Subs sort of are weird and maybe bad. I think that's a totally fine thing to point out. Next question comes from Gary Anchetta, who asks, what makes a sub different than a legionnaire? What makes a sub different than a legion that has people like Matter Eater Lad? But also, what makes them different than just being another legion reject, like the guy who can ripen fruit as long as it's in a paper bag? I don't think that last thing is an actual guy, but that is absolutely the sort of person that might end up in the Legion of Subs. Would definitely get rejected from the Legion. The question here is, what is the point of the Legion of Subs? And I think there's, it's changed over time. I think for a bit, unsurprisingly, the Keith Giffen kind of era of the Legion of Subs. Keith Giffen, very famous for his sort of take or contributions to like the Bwaha League and stuff like that, sort of known for a more irreverent, little meta kind of version of storytelling, a sillier era of DC. And in some ways, and some iconic things come out of that. And it's not that it's a bad way to do it. But I do think that actually paints the subs in the light of being totally incompetent, or like there's a Legion of Substitute Heroes special that is like a Giffen thing. I can't remember with whom, unfortunately, but in that one, they're like woefully ill-equipped to deal with the thing that's happening. They sort of accidentally, like Inspector Gadget style, save the day instead of like taking any action. Whereas I think the original Silver Age version of the Legion of Subs was more that maybe their powers were out of control, or maybe they weren't as useful as the main Legion, or whatever, but they still had something to offer, or something that they wanted to offer, and they took initiative, and they also formed camaraderie to help each other out and make each other feel better about being rejected by the Legion and stuff like that. And so part of their mission was to support the Legion, was to help the Legion. So either the Legion is off world or otherwise occupied, and the subs would step in, or the subs would try to fight a thing the Legion was too busy or unaware to fight. But it wasn't immediately that they were silly. Like in their original conception, the Legion of Substitute Heroes are people that are told no by the Legion, and then they say, that's fine, but I still think I have something to offer. And they sort of make their own purpose, which is actually like quite lovely, you know, like that's a nice idea. So in terms of what does that mean in terms of like, what does it mean to be a sub? A Legion, what does it mean to be a sub? There's going to be so much of this in this episode. Again, it's not necessarily that their powers are bad. Let's take Infectious Lass as an example. She controls bacteria and diseases, but she doesn't have total control over her power. When she eventually goes to audition for the Legion or whatever, she makes someone very sick. I can't remember, Cosmic Boy or someone makes someone very sick, and they go like, we can't have, that's a liability in the field if we all of a sudden get the flu or like whatever. Which is sort of silly, but also fair. But that's still like a good power. Like some sort of like, I don't know what you would call it, but like biokinesis or something, or, you know, like she's essentially controlling biotics and diseases and viruses and stuff. Like she's pathokinetic. I'm not sure what you would call it, but it's, that's a cool, good power. It's more just that she's the liability, or perceived as a liability. The weird thing too, though, is that like theoretically you could train her to control it, and maybe a different team, or a team less bound by weird arbitrary rules than the Legion is, would put the effort into that. Now, there are also people who are rejected because their powers are useless. You know, Color Kid's a good example of this. Color Kid has the ability to change the color of any object. Now, we as comic fans can probably think of examples of times when that's actually quite useful. Are you bright yellow and trying to hide in the shadows? Color Kid changes you into stealth mode, or you know what I mean, something like that. Or are you fighting Silver Age Green Lantern? Color Kid turns himself yellow. Oh no! Like, I think we can come up with ways where that is more useful, and certainly they find a way to use Color Kid's powers. But on the surface, if you're the Legion, you go like, no, thank you. But if you're looking at a character like Matter Eater Lad, a relatively prominent member of the Legion of Superheroes, like his power is that he can eat and digest any material. That sounds really good on paper, but then you kind of realize like his power only works like within, like, he's got to be right up next to, you know, like someone can maybe there's a panel that refutes this, but I don't think he's like catching bullets and eating them, but he can go up to someone and eat their gun, or he can eat his way out of prison, or he can like, I think in that Giffen one, he eats a tunnel, like he tunnels himself somewhere by eating the ground. It's a silly power. It's maybe I think it's not unreasonable to maybe make the argument that it's actually not that practical to have to be right next to a thing in order to use your power. Someone like Night Girl on the Legion of Subs has like the super strength and stuff, and durability and stuff of like Superman, or she says that. I mean, but super strength, super durability, but only when there's no sunlight. So she actually still can use her powers in artificial light, but just not in sunlight. As soon as the sunlight is out, that weakens her. She goes to basically being like mortal and vulnerable and things like that. That's still a pretty useful power. You know, the Legion operates in space. It's hard to avoid sunlight in a solar system. But her power is relatively useful. I think what it ultimately comes down to is that the Legionnaires tend not to have like an obvious weakness or defect in their powers. That's not to say they're without flaws. They all have a flaw of some kind, but it's not like Cosmic Boy is like, I have the power of magnetism, but not if somebody's eating tacos near me. Like the subs always have some weird extra piece to it, and sometimes it's that they can't control their powers, or sometimes it's that like, no, not in the sunlight, or sometimes it's I'm Stone Boy, I turn to stone and then I can't move or do any. It's not, he doesn't become the Thing and then move around in a rock body. He just becomes a solid statue and that's it. And he's not a solid statue that is completely indestructible. He's just made of rock. He can be destroyed. So that, you know, I do think there are some lines there. As far as what would make you just get rejected by the Legion versus joining the subs, I mean, that's more for the Legion of Subs. Like, you don't automatically join the Legion of Substitute Heroes by getting rejected by the Legion. They're separate entities. You know what I mean? So it's not like there's two tiers where it's like, we rejected you for Team A, here's Team B. Or we reject you entirely. It's like, we reject you entirely and maybe the subs will go to draft you or something like that. So anyway, there you go. That's it for Facebook. We are now going over to Instagram. Now we're going to Instagram, take some questions and answer them. This is deeply sad to do by myself. First question from Nug Nargang, our good buddy who was on to talk other C&D list characters not too long ago. Nug asks, why was Polar Boy not good enough for so long? So Breck Bannon, I think is his name, or Breck Brannon. All the Legionnaires, everyone in the 31st century has a weird fucking name. He comes from a planet where at the very least him and in his first appearance, he says some people on his planet have his ability. In other versions, it's everyone on his planet. So, grain of salt. But he comes from a planet where his people live in the hottest, driest desert and have evolved to essentially what he says, like, nullify heat vibrations. He essentially does the Captain Cold Master of Absolute Zero version of things. It's not that he's making ice, it's that his power is more or less affecting molecular movement. And he does it in a way that projects cold and stuff like that. Which is like objectively cool, I think. Like a pretty dope power, pretty good. He's always wearing like thick winter clothes because everywhere other than his planet feels cold to him because he's not in the desert. He gets rejected because in his audition, he like freezes the panel and they're like, we're really cold. Can you stop? I went back and read that first appearance though. And it's funny because I may have just missed it as I was reading, but I feel like in that initial appearance, they actually don't say that he can't control his power. He just demonstrates it and it freezes the room and they go like, that's really good, but no, thank you this time. Which is different. You know what I mean? Like that's a different proposition. Later, I think they explicitly, like say that it's that he couldn't control his powers, that it would go kind of haywire or something like that. But in that first appearance, I actually think it's more that he just made a bad first impression than anything. But essentially, that's how it starts. But he is the leader of the Legion of Substitute Heroes. He has his own, he makes a purpose and a mission for himself to bring in these other heroes, to give them purpose. These people that want to help and want to do good that didn't get into the Legion. I would make the argument that he probably could have gone back and joined the Legion earlier than he did, because he does eventually join the Legion. I think he eventually leads the Legion. He probably could have gone back and done that sooner, but he actually formed his own purpose. Like, leading the Legion of Substitute Heroes actually becomes a thing he wants to do, that he likes to do, that he believes in. So I think, as is the case with most of the substitute heroes, it's not that they weren't good enough. It's possibly a matter of not having seen their own potential, or it's possibly a matter of training or skill or something like that. But Polar Boy, I think, is the first of the subs to make it to the Legion, and he ends up being like a full Legionnaire. Like I say, I'm pretty sure he ends up leading the Legion. So you could say he eventually kind of gets his flowers, gets his due. But it does take a while. The substitute heroes first appear in whatever it is, the 60s. I don't think he joins the Legion until the 80s, the 90s, maybe. It takes quite a long time. So yeah, not insignificant. Next question comes from Max Nopo, who asks, was Arm Fall Off Boy a real character or a one-off joke? Did he ever get any storylines or feature in a significant way? So, Arm Fall Off Boy is one of those characters that, when I was just getting real deep into DC and I was trying to find all the weird corners, Arm Fall Off Boy is a character that would always make those kind of the sort of the lists, the BuzzFeed lists, like the 10 weirdest superheroes you've never heard of or whatever. Arm Fall Off Boy was always on there. And as the name implies, his arms and legs can detach from his body, and he can use them as weapons. And by that, it just means like as clubs and stuff like that. There's a big distinction between that and then a character like TDK, from the Suicide Squad, who is clearly inspired by the idea of Arm Fall Off Boy. But TDK, can still, sort of telekinetically control his limbs when they're detached, right? He sends his arms out into battle. Arm Fall Off Boy didn't have that. He would just rip his arm off and then hold it in the other hand and then club people with it. That was all he could do, and then put himself back together. So he's actually a lot more useless. The Legion, right away rejects him for being weird and useless, essentially. Now the thing with that is, that is pretty much a one-off, that first appearance. But then, like some other things in DC, he becomes that thing where it's kind of fun to reference him. In the 3-boot, or I think it's the 3-boot era, when everyone had a different name, where instead of being Triplicate Girl, she was Triad, or everyone had a fucking cool ass name like that or whatever. Even Arm Fall Off Boy shows up. He's called Splitter. That was his name. Again, I think he only shows up in a couple of issues. I think he joins a different team of weird heroes. But I mean, the short answer though is no. There is no, not that I know of, hidden gem where it's Arm Fall Off Boy. They fucking did it. They gave him his fucking story. He's almost always there as a reference to himself, or as a bit of a joke or a bit of a laugh, or just to acknowledge that part of history still happened in whatever the new retcon continuity was. But no, Arm Fall Off Boy doesn't really, there's no sort of secret gem Arm Fall Off Boy story, if that's what you're looking for. Next question from Robbie's Just This Guy, who asks, do they ever battle a substitute villain group? Petty D-list rivalries just seems like a really fun idea. So, I mentioned before there's a Legion of Substitute Heroes special from the 80s. In that one, there is an offhand reference by a couple of these kind of weird minor bad guy characters. Because the main bad guy in that one is Pulsar Stargrave, who's a big, he's a Legion villain. But there's these couple of kind of hench bad guys. One is called Tusker. He just grows like fucking like walrus tusks really big, or actually they're more like boar kind of because they're bottom teeth ones, right? He grows them like really super long and stuff like that. There is an offhand reference by these like hench people that they either should be or whatever, like the Legion of Substitute Villains. Because in this story, the Legion of Substitute Heroes comes to Bismol, the home world of Matter Eater Lad, to save the day. There's like a bunch of Computo robots or whatever. Pulsar Stargraves trying to take over the planet. And they make some reference to being or joining a Legion of Substitute Villains. Now, I don't know if that's actually a thing, but I suspect it's not. I mean, frankly, even the idea of the Legion of Supervillains is I would say a smaller portion of the Legion's kind of rogue gallery. You know, like they fight Mordru, they fight the Fatal Five, which is the big villain team that the Legion goes up against all the time. Universo and stuff like that. The Legion of Supervillains is also sort of like almost like a throwaway idea. It should probably be bigger than it is. So the Legion of Substitute Villains essentially doesn't exist. But do I think it's a great idea? Yes, because if there's one thing that I love, maybe more than the idea that the superhero team rejects a bunch of people because their powers are a little wacky or whatever, it's the of villains being rejected by other villains, which we see so much more. Like I even think about like something like Final Crisis. Like there's an indignity to Human Flame being at the same table as Lex Luthor, and even Luthor says as much, where he's like, who the fuck do you think you are? Villains are so much cattier about that kind of shit than heroes are. Heroes are always like, oh no, maybe next time you can come out, you'll join. The villains always have this kind of like, bitch, why do you think you could be on this team? And so a Legion of Supervillains, or a Legion of Substitute Supervillains, almost feels like they would be more poised to take on the Legion of Supervillains than to take on the Substitute Heroes, because they would be so like rejected. I think it's a fun idea. I like it, but no, I don't think it's a real thing. But if you wanted to count someone, you could count this like you can count Tusker. I think he'd be in there. Next question from Alfred is Zaddy, who just says, pitch to us your idea for a substitute Legionnaire. I don't have a great one for that. Although I will say, years ago, me and a group of friends, this is not like a novel idea. I'm sure other things have done this. So this is not me trying to say I got there first, but there's, we just thought it would be funny to have in the kind of the Stan Lee way of like, if you get a power, you get a curse. That's the Marvel way or whatever. Me and a group of friends had a thing where we take it one step further and make the powers almost useless, because the curse was so connected to them. So, like, for example, the one that I keep coming back to that I find funny is the idea of, like, someone with super speed, but no endurance. They don't have the cardio for it. So they, like, run super fast, show up at the crime scene, puke behind the dumpster. They've got to, like, rest. They got to take their time. And I think about stuff like that at being really good fodder for something like a like a substitute hero. That makes a lot of sense to me. I mean, again, back to the other question where you're like, is Matter Eater Lad like a great power? You can go even to a character like Joe Na, Ultra Boy. Now, Ultra Boy comes from his power is that he has all of the powers of Superman, but only one at a time. Meaning, he can be invulnerable, but not strong. He could use heat vision, but not be fast. You know what I mean? Like you only get one at a time. Now he can switch instantaneously, but he technically only has one power at a time. And something like that also feels like, because he gets the Legion flight ring, they get to, fly and stuff. And so he can use one power in addition to that. But I would say that's another one that feels like on the cusp of like subs territory, where it's like you have all these powers, but you can only use them one at a time. But I think the thing that would put him over the edge is like, how hard do you have to think about it? Like for Ultra Boy, it's like boom, 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 heat vision, strength, durability, speed, whatever. And he flips very effortlessly. He's very good at it and stuff like that. I think the thing that would put him into subs territory is like, there's a refractory period or something. It's like I can use a power, but then I got to take 10 seconds off, and then I can activate the next power. Like something like that is just enough to make him more of a liability or a little less helpful or something like that. So I think to me, a good substitute hero, their power is their liability, so we talked about, Infectious Lass is a great example. I would say Stone Boy is a great example. Like turning to stone, it's not even that hard of a material, and you can't move, so you just become like a true sitting duck. Like I think that where the power is the liability, that's kind of the best version of a substitute hero for me. All right. Next question comes from Not About Andy, who asks, don't you think that Astro Boy deserved to be a substitute instead of being in the A team? I mean, he had a good character development, but his power was kind of lame. Now, I think you don't mean Astro Boy, like the like cripplingly sad like manga thing about like the scientist who like loses his son and makes a robot son. I don't think you're talking about Astro Boy. I am going to guess you're talking about Star Boy, and that this is an autocorrect situation. Starboy, Tom Kalor, had the power to manipulate the mass, like the gravity of objects. He can make them heavier. Technically, Starboy could make things heavier generally, and then Light Lass could make things lighter. But essentially, his power was over the mass of objects, or rather, the relationship of mass to gravity. That's a great power. And Tom Kalor has like a crazy backstory, and he's like tied to Starman, and there's time travel, and there's, this kind of like element of like, is he crazy or not? Like, he actually probably has one of the more fleshed out personalities and backstories of any Legionnaire. I in no way think that Starboy should have been a substitute hero. But again, to the point of the thing that we were talking about with Matter Eater Lad, you do sometimes go and you look, especially at the old Legion, you go like, some people just had like opposite powers. Like Colossal Boy could only get big and then back to normal. Shrinking Violet could only get small and then back to normal. And it's like, surely there are like heroes that could do both. And you think about that, but then you also look at like the 21st century, like the Justice League, and you go, I guess Atom Smasher gets big and the Atom gets small. We don't really like mess with it. Like, it's actually not that different. But I think you notice it because their names are all these kind of like kitschy, like teen nicknames from the 60s. Like there's Light Lass and Starboy. Like, they might as well just be called like Heavy Kid and like, you know, Feather Lady or whatever. Like, they have kind of silly names, and I think that makes it feel sillier, but it's not actually that different from the power distribution in like the main kind of Justice League era of DC. So yeah, I assume you're talking about Starboy. I don't think he should have been a sub. I think he works great in the Legion. There's a couple of good adaptations of Starboy out there. I would say even that animated, like Timverse Justice League movie that features like Miss Martian and Starboy and the Fatal Five and stuff like that. That's decent and pretty cool. So yeah, that's my feeling about that. And so we're done on Instagram. We're heading on over to Reddit, where everyone's nice and no one's ever mean. And I'm going to take another little sip of my drink here. And we got a question here from Galaxy Eyes Ruler, who asks, what's the backstory of Stone Boy? Does everyone on his planet have the same powers? Is he low-key good? So, Stone Boy is, what's the name of his planet? This is the bit with the Legion for me, is like remembering all the fucking planets. He's from, it's called like Zwen or Zwenia or something like that. He's a Zwenian. So the idea on that planet is that it's almost like a Venus scenario. The planet actually rotates extremely slowly compared to its revolution around the sun, meaning that they have exceedingly long day-night cycles. And so because of that, like many of the Legion things, it's a bit like they evolve with a crazy power because of something on their planet. So Polar Boy, they're stuck in a hot desert. They evolve cold powers or things like that. For Stone Boy, it's a form of hibernation, actually. They turn to stone because of this exceedingly long day-night cycle. And so that's their, like, hibernation process. Now, interestingly, he can flip it on and off like a switch. Like, you would think if you evolved that way on your planet and it was for hibernation, there'd be some sort of intensive, like, for months he must be prepping, you know, like whatever he's consuming and eating, and that it's like prepping him to turn to stone, and it'll last for, you know, whatever, half the year or whatever it is, and then it'll wear off and he'll come back. But no, it's just like he could just be like stone and then like turn it off, like not stone. He could just do it like red light, green light, which is I mean, more compelling. He would be even more useless if that wasn't the case. Again, though, he turns to stone. He doesn't turn to, like, diamond. You're like, we're not even doing the comic thing of, like, diamond, the hardest substance known to man. Like, he's just, like, rocks. We often see him do the thing that, like, Kirby does in Smash Bros., where from a very high height, he'll turn to stone and then fall on something to break it or stop someone or things like that. In that first appearance, he turns to stone and it briefly stops the plant people from getting at him until they start bringing ray guns. And they're like, if they get those ray guns out, they're going to destroy Stone Boy. Which I kind of was, I mean, ray gun actually feels like a thing that wouldn't mess with rocks too much. And B, it's like, if there's one thing that can fuck up rocks, it's plants. You know, like that's plants and water. So at any rate, the thing with his power, though, that makes it very silly kind of substitute hero sort of power is that he's a full statue. It is not a protective shell on him and then he like moves around. He turns to stone. He is a statue. He does not move. He stays that way until he consciously turns that off again. But that just means he's just there. Like you can't go, Stone Boy, go, and then he like armors up and runs in. It's not like a Colossus or Citizen Steel kind of situation or a thing like that. He's just either a living, breathing, flesh and blood person or a pile of rocks, essentially. Like he's not Cronin, he's not like Korg or something like that. So Stone Boy is, I wouldn't say he's low-key good. I think when a story manages to use Stone Boy well, I think it's like a big win, like, and I think he's good for like one big move. You know what I mean? Like, we haven't brought it Stone Boy yet, and he's up on top of a cliff and he jumps off and he turns to stone and it destroys like a vehicle or something. Here's the other thing in comics. We really mess with how hard stone is, like he'll smash through, vehicles or stuff like that. But like normally if you drop just a bunch of rocks on something, it's like the rocks will also break. So we play pretty fast and loose with the physics of rocks, I think, when it comes to Stone Boy, but it's a very funny power. I think he's probably got the funniest power of the entire Legion of Substitute Heroes. It's one that like my dad and I always laugh at. My dad, obviously a big Legion fan, loves the Legion subs. Stone Boy is objectively the funniest one, I think. But yeah, everyone on this planet has those same powers. Next question comes from Parabellum X420, who asks, who has the worst powers on the team and why is it Color Kid? So like we said, Color Kid can just change the color of any object, and that's it. I think it's easy to say that is a bad power because he doesn't. Here's what I'll say though. A power is only as good as how creative you are with it. Now, some of them you get to be uncreative and the power's fine. Like super speed, you can be totally uncreative and super speed is very useful. But that doesn't mean you've unlocked the full potential of super speed. Like I think good Flash stories deal with that. I think you could, if you're being creative, I think you can find ways that Color Kid's power is helpful. He turns something a color and he knows that will attract the local insect life. And then, a swarm of things show up because like everyone knows they love red or, something like that. Or you turn something like a intense like Vanta Black. We talk about Vanta Black from the visual perspective a lot, where it's absorbing light and it makes it very hard to see contour or like distinguish that it exists. But it's not just absorbing light, it's absorbing heat. You can't paint like your car Vanta Black or it'll overheat, it's he could use a power like that. If he could turn something like that black, the albedo effect of it, right? Absorbing all of that radiation could make something hot. I think you could find a way to use Color Kid's ability, to creative effect. It's not completely useless. Is it not that helpful? I would say that's a totally fair assessment. It's not the best. That's a pretty bad one. I think maybe another one that's not that good is Double Header. So Double Header is, I can't remember their names, but they are, from a planet called Janus, I think. And on that planet, everyone splits into identical twins, except for them who remain fused together. Or sorry, hang on. Maybe the thing with them is that, no, they're born with two heads and over time they split into two beings. I don't know that he really has other abilities than that, but they are like two brains and one body. I think he's like a good fighter, but they're two brains, which means sometimes they like argue with themselves and stuff like that. And really the only other thing he's bringing is I think Double Header was like a decent fighter, like a hand-to-hand fighter. But you kind of go like, I don't know that we need that. It's not like two brains makes him super smart. And it's not like having two physiologies means he's like double strong or something like that. I think he's just like basically pretty normal, but he happens to be a good fighter and he happens to have 2 heads. I'd say double header is like maybe also not a great one. Let's see. Do you know what? I just pulled up the roster of the subs, and it says here, I guess Tom Collor maybe was a sub for a little bit. I like him better in the full Legion. So that Starboy thing that we were talking about, I like him better in the full Legion. Oh, Porcupine Pete, he could shoot out like porcupine quills out of his body. That's a sort of weird one. That's a silly one. Antenna Lad and pick up transmissions. That's not a bad power, I would say. But yeah, I mean, I think the worst one is probably, well, it's probably double header. Actually, I'm going to say is worse than Color Kid. Now that I'm thinking about it, Color Kid, I think you can be creative with that power. With double header, I don't really know what you're supposed to do with that, because it's not like a triplicate girl thing where they would like split and then rejoin. He's just not split up yet, like physiologically for his species. So I don't really know what you're supposed to do with double header. All right. That's it for Reddit. Let's move to the Doc Scored. The Doc Scored. Hang on. We don't need no Doc Scoredcation. The wall? Is that fine to do? Is that good even? On the Doc Scored, first question comes from Bisexual Lad. Speaking of Legion of Subs, who asks, with Polar Boy and eventually Night Girl upgrading to the Legion proper, which other subs do you think could one day graduate? Is Sunboy dying the only way Fire Lad could ever make it in? I mean, I think you... At different times, different characters have been on the Legion of Substitute Heroes. If you look up their roster, that also includes like Nora Nal, like Dream Girl, and that, like characters we consider to be full Legionnaires. So there are some that kind of maybe dip in and out of that status. But who do I think this? I think Chlorophyll Kid is an obvious one. Like Chlorophyll Kid's power, I think his thing again was maybe just that he couldn't fully control his powers, but he's not fully like Poison Ivy or Swamp Thing. Like, he doesn't control plant life. He just accelerates plant growth, which is a very specific version of that power. So it's definitely on paper less useful than being actually like chlorokinetic. However, Chlorophyll Kid, I would say, is probably the one with maybe the most like normal, reasonable, least likely to cause a problem power. You know, like Polar Boy, if he loses control of his power, like that's a problem. Same with Fire Lad, same with Infectious Lass. Chlorophyll Kid, you know, worst you do is just let plants grow a lot. It's not necessarily that you're turning them into monster plants or that you know, are controlling them and going crazy or something like that. So I think Chlorophyll Kid is probably of the main Legion of subs. He's the one next to Polar Boy and Night Girl that has the easiest transition to full Legionnaire, I would say. I think Antenna Lad, you can make a strong argument for, you know, and yeah, it's a really hyper specific power to pick up transmissions or whatever, but that they have other hyper specific powers on the Legion. I think his is, you put him and like Timberwolf on a team, right? Like a tracker and someone that can like pick up messages or whatever. Like you sort of have like the spy espionage component or whatever. I think Antenna Lad is a totally fair one to promote to the full Legion. Sunboy and Firelad, I mean, I guess strictly speaking, those are technically different powers. But because Sunboy has the power of the sun, of like a sun. He's like, which sometimes manifests in a very fiery way, but it's technically different. I think, I mean, here's the other thing, and Bisexual Lad's sort of getting at the point here. The Legion of Superheroes has a lot of extremely arbitrary, very stringent rules. How old can you be? Are you allowed to flirt with your teammates, etc., etc.? Like, there's like a fucking like code of conduct to the Legion of Superheroes that there is not for the Justice League or the Titans or whatever. And one of them is like not to duplicate powers of people already in the Legion. And so there's also an element of joining the Legion of Substitute Heroes where it's just like, it was just the wrong timing. Like, we already got one of you, basically, or someone like you. So you don't even necessarily need to have done anything wrong or poorly to not make it into the Legion. So there is an element of maybe them being like, well, Sunboy died. You're up, Firelad. You know, like, we're calling you up to the majors. There is an element of that, I would say, that's in there. Yeah. Next question comes from Ensign Ricky, who asks, what's a power set that seems like it belongs in the subs at first glance, but upon closer inspection is worthy of the full Legion? I guess we sort of answered this already. To me, it's Chlorophyll Kid or Antenna Lad. Those are the real obvious ones for me. But I've got the opposite question also from Ensign Ricky here, which is, what's a power set that seems like it belongs in the main team at first glance, but upon closer inspection, it is only worthy of the Legion of Subs? I got a real spicy take on this one. It's Bouncing Boy. Like, Bouncing Boy turns himself into a giant, largely invulnerable bouncing rubber ball, which is like fine for combat and stuff, but like that's a sub power. That's a substitute hero power. You know what I mean? Like, you should have a plant person on the Legion before you have a bouncing person, surely. Now, again, the writers find a way to make Chuck Tane, to make Bouncing Boy interesting and useful and helpful and things like that. But even his like origin, Bouncing Boy's origin, I'm pretty sure, is that he's supposed to carry this like experimental soda or something from one place to another. He gets tired along the way and thirsty, drinks it, and then it gives him powers, you know? Like, it's sort of a silly way to get powers. I would throw out there that Bouncing Boy feels like a substitute hero. That's my real spicy take on that. Not that I would actually change anything given the chance, but if I'm picking any Legionnaire with a power to go to the subs, it's definitely, yeah, it's got to be, right? Let's see, are there any others? Not offhand that I could think of. I mean, could also make the argument about Triplicate Girl, frankly. You know, being able to split yourself, useful in some ways, but not necessarily if it's just, you know, like, you just make 3 of yourself, but it's like, but what are you good at? It's like, oh, I have 3 of me. But what are you good at? Like, there's a certain missions where that makes total sense. You need to like be in more than one place at once, or, you know, it gives you the upper hand in a fight or something like that. But I do think there's an element of Triplicate Girl that could theoretically be like that. I think Phantom Girl, just in terms of the idea of maybe sometimes with Phantom Girl, we come back to the idea of not being able to control your powers. So Phantom Girl can go intangible. Her planet, Bigzatul, is sort of like out of phase or something like that. We play with that idea, though, of her not being able to totally control her power. We play with that in Young Justice. We play with that idea in the Terrifics. It comes up a lot, actually, with Phantom Girl. And so I think on those grounds, if we're talking about what would qualify you for the substitute heroes or what would disqualify you from the main Legion, Phantom Girl's a really key candidate for it too, because her power is inconvenient, I would say, to go intangible, but not 100% all the time, be able to control when you can be tangible again. That's absolutely a substitute hero kind of power. So I think there's a few options in the Legion. I don't think you can look at the Legion and be like, well, obviously we can tell why these guys made it. Like sometimes you look at them and you go like, them, I think that's why I like the Silver Age version of the substitute heroes, where it's not just that they're silly. It's that it just didn't work out for them. They just had too little control, or it was a bad day to audition or something like that, but they just go off and they do their own heroing anyway. And it's a little less silly. It's a little less like a Justice League Antarctica Gnort situation where it's like they're so incompetent they accidentally save the day. I kind of prefer them being like, not necessarily like super capable, but just not jokes. Like I sort of prefer that for the subs. And when you do that, then I think it does open the door to like Phantom Girl could absolutely be a substitute hero, and it wouldn't be like a knock on her character. It would just be that like this power is like wildly inconvenient and inconsistent. So, yeah, there you go. Next question from the Moral Compass of the Doc Scored, who asks, if you are a substitute hero, are you training every day hoping for your big break, or are you getting a day job and treating your sub status as an occasional obligation like a volunteer firefighter? I'll throw out there lots of volunteer firefighters putting a lot of time in, so especially in rural communities and things like that where I live. The substitute heroes, like I said in that first event, they make their own like base, and they make their own trouble alert, and they make a spaceship, and they set themselves up just as a separate entity. The substitute part of it is just that they see themselves as they want to help support the Legion. Now, sometimes that means stepping in when the Legion is gone. Sometimes that means maybe the Legion is too busy to deal with smaller things, so they deal with it so the Legion doesn't have to. Or sometimes that means the Legion is in trouble, we should save them. There's sort of like a few versions of that. But they aren't reservists, let's put it that way. Like the picture that we're painting here of like, well, no, normally I just like I run this gallery, and every once in a while my watch beeps and I go off into space as Polar Boy or whatever. That's not really the case. It's more that they are a full superhero team doing it as often as any other kind of superhero. Now, in the future too, the Legionnaires, they don't have secret identities and like day jobs and stuff like that. Their job is Legion. This Ken's job is Beach. Those Legionnaires' job is Legion. The subs are more or less like that, I think. But they're just handling smaller stuff or different stuff, or they're trying to help out. So I think it's less of a like reservist kind of thing, and more just that they are just a separate, officially unaffiliated team that just happens to be like vaguely obsessed with the other team. So no, I think they are training every day, because they also they know they have issues with their powers. I do think in my ideal version of the substitute heroes, they are like very much like we don't have an expert to train us, but we'll work with each other to make ourselves better. Like they have like that kind of energy that I like. And I think I would want to see in future substitute hero kind of stories. Yeah. Next question comes from Butt Fart Butt, who asks, what's the deal with Chlorophyll Kid? So we've talked about him a bit and what his powers are. The thing with Chlorophyll Kid is, unlike Polar Boy or Stone Boy, whose powers are genetic, like their entire species has them. Chlorophyll Kid is that he's like, I think like as a child or whatever, he's like dropped into some like chemical formula, some like hydroponic formula or something like that. Someone just like whoops and like drops him in. And as I recall, there's a panel where someone goes, well, it doesn't look like it looks like your boy is fine, but who knows what the long-term effects of this could be. And they just kind of fast forward and he's like, and now I'm Chlorophyll Kid. It's a sort of like, he has this accident where he falls in this like liquid, mysterious science liquid. And the doctor just goes like, honestly, I've got no idea. Check back in 10 years. So I'll tell you if it did something to him, which I think is very funny, sort of throwaway kind of origin story. But it means he is not, there's not like a planet of chlorophyll folk that he comes from, which does distinguish him from a number of the Legionnaires. Not all of them. Some of them do get their powers by accident or by experiment or things like that. There's plenty of that in the Legion, but yeah, the Chlorophyll Kids, I think is like specifically funny because of just that idea of like every other, like you're exposed to a chemical thing, it happens so instantaneously. And in this one, the doctor like just like sort of towels him off and goes like, I think he's fine, but honestly, this could fuck him up later. And then they just learn that what it does is it makes him, gives him the ability to make plants grow faster. But I love the idea that it doesn't kick in right away. And the doctor sort of seems like unwilling to investigate it further. And there's something about that that's just very funny to me. All right, next question from Only Just Dan Dunn. We've only just Dan Dunn, who asks, which DC character, present or future, should be demoted to the Legion of Subs? So let's take that question from Ensign Ricky and let's expand it beyond the actual Legion. It's not just demote a Legionnaire. It's take any character in DC and essentially say, like, we no longer require your services, and then send them to the Legion of Substitute Heroes. So for this, I'm going to say it has to be a hero, obviously, if they're going to be on the Legion of Substitute Heroes. And I'm going to say they have to be, like, a member of a team. We have to be kicking them off of one team to send them to the Substitute Heroes. So it can't be, like, a solo operator, I guess is what I'm saying. Who do I think should get the boot and go down to the Legion of Substitute Heroes? Oh, that's a tricky one. That, I mean, it actually is a tough one, I think. Let's have a think here. Yeah. Interesting. I'm trying to think of a character who maybe either has limited control of their power, or their power fritzes out sometimes, or they're just sort of like doubling up, like duplicating too much of what's already. I mean, God, if we go that route, then it's like you're just adding like super people to the or bat people to the Legion of Substitute Heroes, which we probably shouldn't be doing. Yeah, I think I might go with, and also I think because of their name, I think they would fit in. I'm going to go with Lagoon Boy. I feel like his power is not totally terrible, but we got a lot of Atlanteans and like people that can be underwater, and a lot of them can do like better things than Lagoon Boy can do, which is just get like big and strong kind of thing. Also, Lagoon Boy is a great name for like a Legionnaire or a substitute Legionnaire. So I'm gonna send Lagoon Boy to the Legion of Substitute Heroes. I think that might be the one that I do. Yeah, I'm sticking with that one. I think. Although I think you could also, I think you could go like pre-Flashpoint Vibe. Vibe could absolutely be a substitute hero. You could have, like Crimson Fox, whose power is largely about, I think, pheromones and stuff like that. Crimson Fox could probably make a fine substitute hero. I think if you start looking at, like the Detroit or Elite eras of like the Justice League or like Global Guardians, like you start looking at like those kind of groups, you can find some people to populate a legion of substitute heroes. But I'm going to stick with Lagoon Boy, I think. That's the one I'm going to throw in there. All right. And final question from Fingerstripes13, nice, who asks, would Yonder Man from Suicide Squad Get Joker be a Legion of Subs member with his power? Or would they not take him on account of his drug use? Now, unfortunately, I have not read Suicide Squad Get Joker. And this is petty of me, but I just... too many Joker things, and I know a bunch of them are good, but I can't get them all, and so I haven't read this one yet. What I understand of Yonder Man, though, is that he's a teleporter. I'm assuming that if we're bringing him up because his power is a problem, he must have some kind of like line of sight thing, the way like Nightcrawler does, or something like that, where like he can't just teleport anywhere or something, or so it's either that he has to see where he's going, or maybe his power, like he can teleport, but he's only accurate within 3 feet or something like that. Like I'm assuming he's got something like that. I would say if it's a line of sight thing, I don't know that that's enough to make you a substitute hero, because it does work out pretty well for Nightcrawler. If it's the like, I can teleport, but I'm only like accurate within like a percentage, that's a way funnier version of that to me. So if it's something like that, then, not a bad idea for a substitute hero, I think. A sort of like vague teleporter. Like, I can get you near, like, you want to go to Toronto? Like, I can get you to Ajax. You gotta go, like, I guess it's close. It's technically close on the scale of the world, but it's not great. It's not helpful. I think that's funny. I think there's if it's something like that, I think there's a version of that that's quite good. Now, on the drug use thing, the Legion is clean cut. Like I said, they've got rules. They got more rules than any other team, and I think the Legion of Substitute Heroes, in trying to live up to the Legion, they also have a charter and meetings with name tags and like fucking all sorts of shit like that. Like they're probably following Robert's Rules of Order and all this kind of stuff. I think the drug use would totally kick them off the team. The Legion are clean cut, squeaky clean. And so to me, you're out of there if you're doing drugs. You're never going to find Snowflame on the Legion. Never, ever going to happen. I guess unless the 31st century just doesn't consider cocaine a drug anymore culturally or something. But no, I would that would absolutely disqualify Yonder Man from membership. So that's it. That's the end of the questions. Next week, I honestly, I don't listen. We have a lot of fun on this show, and sometimes we have a lot of fun about, joking about different things that may or may not be appropriate to joke about. And all of those chickens are coming home to roost next week when our episode comes out on 9/11. So next week is our 9/11 episode, like 8 years into the show. And so I'm going to put out there that we will talk about DC's version of comics that referenced or dealt with 9/11, moments, images, panels, comics, stories. They could be stories written later that definitely reference things like that, or stories that are like maybe metaphorical of 9/11, where it's about, terrorism or things like that. But Next week's the 9/11 episode, so send your questions. If you want to do that, we're the Dr. DC podcast everywhere on social media. You can even send it by email to drdcpodcast@gmail.com. And if you want more content than that, even go to patreon.com/DrDC. There's a $1, $5, $7 level. They all give you access to the Discord, our awesome Discord fan community. And at the higher levels, you get bonus episodes. The double dose. September is challenge month. So we're into, the second annual challenge month. So that's kicking off, this week. And at the higher tier, there are bonus series. There's Toretto Talks, Bonding Time, Cerebros, and working on what the next one's going to be. So that's coming. And all of that helps to support us. And of course, if you want more stuff for free from me and Richard, you can go check out our other podcast, Ghost Facers, a Supernatural rewatch. We're going through every single episode of the CW Supernatural. We talk about real world monster lore, behind the scenes stuff about the show. We are in the early days of season 10 of 15 of that show. So go check that out. It's a ton of fun. And that's it.
Ciao, ciao. Adios.
All the superheroes, they always fight for what is right. Live with danger and adventure, they are men of might.
This was a Brain Freeze podcast.